Welcome to the Crime Closet. We're going to kick off season 1 by doing a deep dive into the case of Mackenzie Branham. This little angel, she just has my heart, and her case keeps me up at night. And before we talk about how Mackenzie passed, I just want to talk a little bit about how Mackenzie lived. So, in this first episode, we're going to talk about Mackenzie's life before the fire. So, this is just a little bit about who Mackenzie was because I think that's super important. And I think my goal for this deep dive, honestly, is to get people as angry as I am. As a mother, if that sounds crazy, but if you guys get as angry as I am, then I feel like something's going to get done. So that's where I'm at with Mackenzie's case. Buckle up, buttercups. This one's tough. Any child loss is tough, but this is just devastating. Devastating. Mackenzie was born in Dayton, Ohio on May 30th of 1997. Her dad is Donald R. Branham Jr., and her mom is Mary Ann Potter. She attended Jeffersonville United Methodist Church and Jeffersonville Elementary. She had one older sister and two younger brothers. Her and her younger brothers were by Donald. There was a question about the youngest brother's paternity, but Donald refused to do the testing on that. And he said, "That's my son. I don't care what anybody says. I don't care what the tests say." And he raised his youngest son no matter what. So to him, all three children are his. And Mackenzie was a lot like her dad. She was super independent. She was the mom of her household. At 8 years old, she was cooking meals for her brothers. She was helping them get bathed and to bed. She would read them books. She would get them up and ready for school and get them out the door. She was also an amazing friend. Her friend said that Mackenzie would borrow money from her dad. She would ask her dad for his spare change, and she would supply kids at school that couldn't buy their lunch every day with money for lunch. And so she would ask Don for all of his quarters, and she would use his pocket change to feed her friends. And I think that's really admirable at 8 years old. And you guys know that I believe in Jesus, and I believe that it's terrible to think that children die, and I wish they didn't. I wish that no children would die. But I want to let you guys in on the first Bible verse that my grandmother, God rest her soul, ever taught me. And it was that Jesus said, "Let the children come, because the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." And that's Matthew 19:14. And I just wanted to say that because my grandmother said once, it's hard to imagine the death of a child, but it's hard to imagine a heaven without children. And I just wanted to say that because throughout this podcast and this deep dive, it's really hard to imagine the things that Mackenzie went through in her short life and the trauma. And I just want you to be able to think on the flip side of that, that even though Mackenzie should be here today, that the kingdom of heaven belongs to her now. And there is no pain or fire or trauma in heaven. So, with that being said, I want to continue to talk about Mackenzie. Mackenzie's parents had a tumultuous relationship. That is no secret. And Dawn has really been his daughter's advocate since before her passing. But he did not want to alienate his daughter from her mother. And I want to note that because although Mackenzie isn't alive, I think Dawn in his mind was doing the right thing, trying to preserve Mackenzie's relationship with her mother. And I do believe, in my very own opinion, that that led to her passing, but that is not Don's fault. He stated that Marianne would cheat. They both worked at local bars. Marianne was a bartender for many years, and Don was a bouncer. And I'm not sure if that's how they met or not. I don't think I covered that in my research, but I plan to sit down with Don and talk. So I'll ask him that if I think of it, how they met. But they were, they were living a lifestyle in and out of bars. They had young children. They had a tumultuous relationship. Don caught Marianne cheating. He told a story on an interview that I listened to that instead of going to work one day, Marianne would let the laundry pile up waist high. So he himself into a pile of laundry and hid instead of going to work. And a man came into his home. So, anyway, that was a story of the beginning of the end of their relationship. And this is while the kids were very, very, very young. So, Marianne allegedly cheated, and Dawn had left her. It was on again, off again for a minute. And then they separated, and Dawn got custody of the kids. The three that he had, Mackenzie and the two younger boys. Her older sister went to her dad and allegedly would visit Marianne on weekends, like Mackenzie and the boys would do sometimes. So, the story of how Dawn got custody was that Marianne left and took the kids and ended up in a hotel with a man that she was having an affair with. They allegedly left the kids in the hotel and went out drinking. And somebody had got a hold of Don to let him know that his kids had been left unattended in the hotel room. And when Don got there, and they opened the door. The babies were in the room. The oldest, it was all the 4 of the kids were in the room. The oldest was about 5 years old, and she was feeding the baby McDonald's, who was 5 months old. So, Don got emergency custody of the kids and ended up he never got a lawyer. He fought with Marianne for years and years and years, and he won custody of Mackenzie and his boys. So they were living with Don in Washington Courthouse, Ohio. Mary Ann then began a relationship with a man named Kenny. And we'll get into Kenny's history later. But for now, we're just going to state that Mary Ann and Kenny Mossberger began a relationship and lived in a home over in Jeffersonville, Ohio. And they would get their kids, Marianne's kids, occasionally on weekends. And that was when they allegedly wanted to be parents and step parents. So Don had full custody of the kids. In the very beginning of 2006, let's picture this. Mackenzie's 8 years old. She is the mother of her household with her dad. She's cooking meals. She's cleaning up. She's getting her brothers off to school. And she gets this sudden opportunity. Marianne reaches out to her and tells her that she's going to be kicking Kenny out. Kenny's going to be leaving. And this was probably a big deal to Mackenzie because from everything that I can gather, Kenny was not nice to the children. And that is by accounts of the younger brothers who are living and who have done interviews that I have personally listened to very carefully. Kenny was not nice to the children, especially Mackenzie. He was very hard on Mackenzie. Mackenzie had a lot of issues 2005 into 2006. She was having bedwetting issues and frequent yeast and urinary tract infections. And we all know what that is a sign of. And Dawn had taken her to the doctor, and Mackenzie had just not, she had not divulged anything to her dad. And I had a really good relationship with my dad growing up, so I could imagine that Mackenzie was probably afraid of what Don would do if he knew what was happening to her. That is my opinion. So Mackenzie was having a lot of issues, and one thing that I heard in the interviews is that Kenny would really torture her over peeing the bed, and he would refuse to change her sheets. He would make her sleep in her clothes that were soaked in urine. He had also made her wear her urine soaked underwear on her head as a punishment. So, in January of 2006, when Marianne reached out to her and said, I'm kicking Kenny out. Kenny's leaving. Your big sister's moving back home with me. I want you to come home. It's just going to be girls. And I think Mackenzie got excited. And I think Don didn't want to stop her. And I think he was trying to do the right thing for his daughter, like I said, and preserve her relationship with her mom because every teenage girl needs their mom. And it's hard for dads to raise daughters alone, and they miss out on certain things without their mom. And I think Don had that in his brain. And when Mackenzie said that she wanted to go stay with Marianne and her big sister in Jeffersonville without Kenny, I think Don was definitely open to letting her do that. And she did. And she was attending Jeffersonville Elementary School. And the week leading up to the fire, there was some alleged shift in behavior with Mackenzie, and that is according to her very close friends at school. There is a girl that came forward with a letter several years later, and she explained this conversation that she overheard. And the little girl didn't come forward until several years later, and I believe that's because she didn't really make the connections, and she deserves no judgment. She was a kid. She was 10, 11. So, let's not be too harsh on her, please. She did witness a conversation on the playground, and she said she was outside, and for whatever reason, she was near a teacher when Mackenzie's friend led her up to the teacher and kind of pushed her forward and convinced her to tell this teacher something that she was obviously reluctant to divulge. And the student witnessed Mackenzie's friend pushing her towards this teacher, saying, "You need to tell, you need to tell, you need to tell." And Mackenzie being very, she was moving away from the touch as her friend was pushing her forward, like she didn't really want to be touched or pushed into divulging this information. But her friend, also an 8-year-old girl, I think was really concerned about what Mackenzie had overheard, and she wanted her to tell someone. And bless that little girl's heart because this is a pretty big clue in this case that was witnessed. The older student said that Mackenzie's friend wanted her to tell the teacher about a conversation that she overheard. And Mackenzie said, "No, it was a dream. I'm pretty sure it was a dream." So it's up in the air whether Mackenzie overheard this conversation or whether she had a dream that she heard this conversation. I believe that Mackenzie heard this conversation, but that is completely speculative from my point of view. She said that she had a dream or overheard from the top of her stairs, which makes sense because Mackenzie's bedroom was on the top floor. She said that she overheard her mom and her stepdad and her uncles talking about burning down the house. And Mackenzie was afraid that her mom and her uncles were going to burn down the house. So she was asking the teacher and the student of different ways to stay safe in a house fire. And something came out from that older student, and she had advised Mackenzie after the teacher walked away to wrap herself in a blanket if she couldn't get outside to protect herself from smoke and flame. And we'll put a pin in that and come back to it in the next episode. But try to remember the conversation that this other student overheard because that's going to be very important later. So Mackenzie's behavior had shifted. She was nervous. She was uneasy at school. She was asking questions. And it seems to me like she was afraid that something was about to happen and she wanted to protect herself. The day of the fire was April 27th of 2006. And Mackenzie left school with her little friend that she always walked home with. He was a little boy, a grade underneath her in school, and he would actually have to walk from Jeffersonville Elementary down to the laundromat to meet his mom. And the way her work schedule was, he had to wait for a good 5 or 10 minutes on his mom. And Mackenzie, being the great friend and big sister figure that she was, she would walk her friend to the laundromat every day, wait for his mom to show up, wait for him to get in with his mom. She'd say her little hellos and goodbyes, and make her way towards her home. On this particular day, her friend noticed a difference in Mackenzie. He said Mackenzie came out of school with a large box full of her school supplies, like she had cleaned out her desk, which is odd, right? Was Mackenzie planning on not coming back to school? It was, after all, a Thursday. She had planned to go stay with her dad that weekend. So, why did Mackenzie clean out her desk and possibly her locker at school that day? Her friend said the box was full of her belongings, and Mackenzie was acting different. He said she didn't feel like talking much, and when they got to the laundromat, she told him that she couldn't stay and wait. She had to go. Her little friend remembers watching her walk towards her house, and that was significant to him because he said it was the only day since Mackenzie came to Jeffersonville Elementary and they became friends that she hadn't waited with him for his mom. And it was forever etched into his brain. Even 20 years later, he remembers watching Mackenzie walk away because that was the last time he ever saw his friend. Now, we can only speculate about the night of the fire and what happened to Mackenzie after she walked home that day. We can only speculate because Marianne's not talking, much like anybody else who's tried to deep dive into this case. I've tried to reach out to her, no response. And after all, her and Kenny are the only people that were really witnesses to the evening of the fire and what could have happened to Mackenzie between the time of 4 p.m. and midnight. So we can only speculate. But what the evidence shows is that a fire was set in that home that night, a fire that could have looked accidental at first, but was ruled an arson. So it was set. And also, DNA was recovered, male fluid DNA, if you know what I mean, was recovered from 3 orifices on this baby girl. 8 years old, you guys. 8 years old. And she was covered in male fluids. And then her house was set on fire. And I want to just add that the chances of Mackenzie escaping that fire without an adult busting in the window and pulling her out were slim to freaking none because her stepdad had screwed the windows shut. And I mean, let's just think about that, guys. I've raised girls. I just raised a teenager, and I get it. I get it. Wanting to make sure that they can't sneak out and get themselves into a dangerous situation. It seems like in Mackenzie's house, the dangerous situation was inside. But guys, it has to be noted, screwing windows shut is dangerous. Teenagers sneaking out is dangerous. But in the event of a fire, if your child is not strong enough to bust their window, they are trapped inside. So let's think about that for a second. It's also stated that Mackenzie had a lock on the outside of her bedroom door. Why? Why would there be a lock on the outside of an 8-year-old's bedroom door? Granted, in the fire report, it stated that the bedroom door was open, but the fire was set on the stairs. So Mackenzie had no way out other than the window, but the window was nailed shut. Both windows. Mackenzie had 2 windows in her room, and the neighbor's barn was close enough that she could have jumped from window to barn roof and made it had her windows not been screwed shut. Why was a fire set in that house that night? Why was Mackenzie found in bed? Why was she covered in male DNA? What happened to Mackenzie on the night of April 27th, 2006? We'll talk more about the fire in the next episode.